Upon seeing Andrei Tarkovsky's first film, Ivan's Childhood, Ingmar Bergman was quoted saying, "My discovery of Tarkovsky's first film was like a miracle. Suddenly I found myself standing at the door of a room, the keys of which had, until then, never been given to me. It was a room I had always wanted to enter, and where he was moving freely and fully at ease. I felt encouraged and stimulated. Someone was expressing what I had always wanted to say without knowing how. Tarkovsky is, for me, the greatest." That was Ingmar Bergman talking about Andrei Tarkovsky, and that was also me talking about Hideki Anno and Neon Genesis Evangelion. I really like this quote because I think it very directly and elegantly gets to the heart of what great art is about, be it a film or a book or a piece of music. Great art has this ability to convey and elicit subtle emotions which are difficult, or sometimes even impossible, to convey with normal language. Regardless of whatever opinion you hold on Eva, it is impossible to deny its popularity and relevancy. And despite its esoteric storytelling and largely taboo subject matter, Eva manages to maintain and grow a community of loyal fans to this day. And this relevancy is much more than just being a respected cult classic in a few niche circles dedicated to anime and art house cinema. Even if you've never seen the show, if you spent any amount of time on the internet, you've inevitably been inundated with memes or discussion of its characters and themes. And all of this is despite not having constant adaptations or sequels which keep it in the limelight. Aside from the rebuild films, and even then, those were 4 films released over the course of over a decade, and it's not like they swept award shows or anything. But why exactly is this? Why or how has Ava managed to maintain this ubiquitous position in popular media? And what allows it to continue to grow its community with younger generations just discovering it? It would be easy to say it's a great series with universal themes, so it's only natural that everyone would love it. But there are tons of great series, which are not necessarily even as old as Ava, which at one point or another were just largely forgotten, which have failed to maintain large communities and resonate with people rediscovering them. Not that Reddit is the ultimate measure of popularity, but just compare the size of the Ava sub and its active posts to something like Code Geass or Haruhi subs. You'll see that Ava dwarfs them. Well, I think I managed to at least partially discover the reason why Ava is so popular with Generation Z, and I believe it hints at something much more insidious happening in the world today. I think to really understand Ava, you have to understand the cultural context it was made in, and what the creator, Hideki Anno, was responding to in the world. I'm going to let Anno describe what was happening in Japanese society at the time with his own words, from another series of his, Karikano.
Time is around the end of the 1990s. Japan was suffering the worst economic depression in the post-war era. This caused chain reaction bankruptcies, increasing rates of unemployment, and unbelievably heinous crimes committed by youths. It was a time and place that was suitably described by the phrase, the end of the century.
So after 30 years of economic and technological growth across the nation, which had come to be known as the Great Economic Miracle, in the 90s, the stock market and real estate markets crashed. The effects of this were immediately felt all across society. Following the end of the economic miracle, themes of youth rebellion become very common across Japanese media from this era. And it's one of those things that once you start to notice it, you start to realize it everywhere. For example, just other anime such as Hideki Anno's own Karikano or His and Her Circumstances, or from Gainax's other show, Fooly Cooly, or even Serial Experiments Lane. All these are anime which take on much deeper meanings when viewed through the lens of Japanese society's response to economic turmoil. And if you want to look beyond just anime, films such as Anno's own Love and Pop, or Shuji Iwai's All About Lily Chow Chow, one of my personal favorites if I may add, or Battle Royale, or Blue Spring, or Suicide Club. These are all spectacular films which take on much deeper meanings when viewed through the lens of rebellion as a remedy to the failures of the adults in society. But what does this have to do with Evangelion and Gen Z? Well, I think the traumas of Evangelion are a metaphor for the stock market crash and society's response. To be more direct, I believe that the second impact, the disaster which sparked all the chaos in the show, is a direct metaphor for the stock market crash. And furthermore, each of the main characters are meant to personify different facets of Japanese society's response to the crash. So, for example, Gendo represents the boomer or the Showa generation who maintain power but are largely distant from the problems affecting the younger generations. Shinji and Asuka represent the youth who have to find out how to navigate a world where the social contract has essentially fallen out. And Misato represents the in-between generation who struggle to navigate the adult world and become parents while having fewer resources than the prior generation. Yes, Ava is about mecha fights. Yes, Ava is about loneliness and depression. Yes, Ava is about the pain of getting close to people and the hedgehog's dilemma. But Ava is also about generational trauma. and more specifically, it's about the way different segments of society respond to nationwide trauma. One of the things I find so interesting about the Second Impact is the way it's discussed by different characters in the show. For example, when old people tell stories which took place before the impact, there's much more cheer in their voice. They speak of it not just with nostalgia, but with sadness, because it feels like the world has grown much smaller. There's not just a remembering of good times, but they're coping with the fact that those times are gone and never coming back. Meanwhile, when you hear younger people talk about the Second Impact, they talk about it much more nonchalantly, matter of fact. For example, there's a scene where Asuka wants to go out for steak dinner, but Misato says that they can't afford it, and you just hear Asuka's like, "Oh, well, that's the Second Impact generation for you." I think the way that generations are talked about, and the way they talk about each other is very interesting. It's very telling. There are countless scenes which feature little details of world building like this, which I believe added tremendously to the texture of the show, and show just how disconnected the lives of the different generations are. The Second Impact wasn't just a single explosion. It had a lasting effect on the world's geography, politics, and climate, and this shifted all of society's perspective. All this loss of scale permeates throughout all facets of society, and it created a divide between those who lived before the times and those who lived after. In this metaphor, Gendo and Seal are the older adults. They represent what's in America in the West, the Boomer generation, or what's in Japan, the Showa generation. They're technocratic, self-important, and absolutely convinced that they have the right to steer the planet. Gendo is traumatized by the death of his wife, but instead of accepting she's dead and trying to connect with his son, he believes that he can create his perfect world through the Human Instrumentality Project. Gendo is stuck in the past mentally, but instead of accepting the new reality he's faced with, he's arguably the most delusional of the show, because he can't even fathom a world where things are not perfect for him, because that's all he's ever known. If Gendo is the Boomer or the Showa generation hoarding wealth and living in oblivious delusion, then Shinji represents the segment of society who wants to live a normal life and follow the rules, but learns that the rules don't exist anymore. On paper, Shinji is pretty much the perfect Asian kid. He has a sense of filial piety, he listens to Gendo's orders no matter how crazy they sound, he cleans up Misato's apartment for her, he's a diligent student, he cares about his friends, and he practices the cello in his free time. Shinji isn't oblivious to the state of the world. He has a sense of right and wrong, and he wants to do right. He's like this at the beginning of the show because despite recognizing how messed up the world is, he believes that through hard work, he can persevere through the hard times and fix society, and that he will eventually become rewarded. Shinji is able to maintain this composure through the first half of the show quite well, and in fact, he is rewarded. He manages to make friends and find a second family with Misato, Asuka, and Pen, but he can only be perfect for so long, and eventually the state of the world becomes too much, not just for Shinji, but those around him, and the whole weight of their situation comes crashing down on him. When the mecha battles become too much, he has no one to turn to, and turns inward, the only place he feels that he can't be hurt. Part of Shinji's problem is that he has no older figures to turn to. He obviously can't turn to Gendo because, well, he's Gendo, but what about his adoptive mother, Misato? Misato is a really interesting character because she represents the in-between generation. She saw what life was like before the Second Impact, but she's had to navigate adulthood afterwards. She was literally at ground zero as the only survivor. She's like the generation who were entering the workforce just as the crash was happening, the ones who were first to get cut when tightening came. I'm sure anyone who entered the workforce in 2008 or 2020 can resonate with the feeling of finally getting your life together just to have society take it away. Misato has to learn how to be an adult parent figure while having fewer resources than the earlier generations. But she kind of knows that she's a failure and can't do her duty. She responds by turning to alcohol and sex to find meaning, validation, and fun. When you start to read Misato's alcoholism as more than just a cute character trait, and through the context of this recession, it's easy to see the parallels between Misato's coping and the coping we see with the opioid crisis in the West today. The first time I watched Ava, I didn't really like Asuka's character. She just kind of felt like an annoying brat to me. But once I started to see her through this context, her character finally clicked for me. I think Asuka is the most hyper-aware character of the state of the world. She knows exactly how messed up she is. She doesn't articulate it, but she feels it. Unlike Shinji, she doesn't try to ignore the world, but she goes headfirst into the chaos. She believes as long as she can be the best at everything, she'll win. Asuka is kind of like the last survivor on the Titanic, who sees that there's one life raft left and is going to do whatever it takes to get it. She has a loud personality, she wears bright clothes, and she always has to have the highest score. Asuka does all this for attention, but she doesn't just want attention because she wants attention for the sake of it. This is a survival mechanism for her. Asuka gets validation through her personality and test scores, but also by being attractive to older men. Asuka knows children are weak, and she wants to grow up as fast as possible so she can be strong, and part of growing up is becoming a sexual figure. This is why she's insistent on being seen as a sexual figure by the older men, such as Kaji and Shinji. After watching Hideki Anno's live-action film Love and Pop, a lot of Asuka's character finally started to click for me, and in fact, it was watching that and making the connections between Asuka and Love and Pop which was the impetus for this video. For those unfamiliar, Love and Pop is a live-action film directed by Hideki Anno, which follows high school girls in Tokyo doing, I believe they call it Enjo Kozai, or compensated dating. And these are girls who go on dates with older men just because it makes money. And it's largely, it's not quite prostitution. Something the film is very clear to point out is that there's nothing necessarily sexual about this, but a large part of it has to do with finding validation. Both older men, they like spending time with young women, and the young women like being recognized by the older men. It's a way to get value, be perceived as having value. And apparently this was a common thing across Japan, or at least Tokyo, in the 90s. It was a way for young girls to find meaningful employment when traditional fields failed to give economic stability. I think Asuka is meant to represent girls in 90s Tokyo who found validation through relationships with older men. And when we try and compare this to Gen Z today, I don't think it's hard to see the parallels with younger women looking for validation on Instagram or OnlyFans. Once you start to read Eva as a metaphor for Japanese society learning to cope with the realization that the economic turmoil, just starting at that point, would ensure that the next generation of youth were going to live less prosperous lives than their parents, I think it starts to click and make a lot more sense. And I also think that this deeper reading also explains why the youth of today resonate with it, either consciously or subconsciously. Hiring freezes, the proliferation of temp or gig work, stagnant wages, and skyrocketing housing are all common features of society today. The problems that left Japanese society flustered are also starting to catch up with the West, and the anxieties and fears which manifested in Japanese society at the time are manifesting the same way in Western societies today. In case it wasn't obvious, I'm a massive fan of Eva, and as an aspiring writer, I have all the respect in the world for Hideki Anno. And what really elevates Eva for me is not just that he recognizes these problems and that he writes about it in a meaningful way, but he does, I think, the hardest thing to do as a writer. He doesn't just complain, he offers a remedy to these problems. In the end, Shinji never wins. He doesn't defeat the final monster, he doesn't save everyone, he never even gets to make up with his father. But what Shinji manages to do is something far more powerful, something that everyone can do, but very few people ever actually do. Shinji learns to love himself. And I think this was the solution for the kids in the 90s, and I think it's the solution for kids today. Because no matter how messed up the world is, we'll all be okay so long as we can remember to love ourselves. Congratulations.
Congratulations! Congratulations! Congratulations!
Congratulations!
Congratulations!
Congratulations!
Congratulations!
Congratulations!